Good day. My name is Jeff Fortuna. Recently, two Naropa faculty members, Giovannina Jobson and Cassell Gross, asked me if I were willing to be interviewed by them over Zoom. They were looking for people who were applying the Maitri teachings to therapeutic work with people in real-world settings. The Windhorse Project has been integrating these teachings and practice with our clinical experience for 40 years, so they contacted us. The idea was that the recording of this interview would then be shared with the students of the Master of Divinity course that they were teaching on Maitri practice. I accepted their invitation with the understanding that the interview recording could be shared more widely. Before the interview begins, I would like to provide a commentary on the painting that you are now looking at. This is one of two Buddhist artworks that Ed Podval painted while he was in long retreat in France from 1990 to 2002. The other painting is of a peony flower. This one is his mystic diagram of the wisdom mandala of the 5 Buddha families. Paintings like this are used as an aid to visualization in meditation practice. One could regard this as a unique lens through which we can view ourselves and our world as a dynamic pattern of colorful energies. Such a view is known as mandala perspective, which sees that awareness covers the whole of existence, from the ground of being out to the expanse of phenomena. The diagram fills every gap of the canvas, which conveys this sense of the totality of awareness. Mandala is described as the orderly chaos of wisdom and confusion that constantly emerge together in nowness. Chogyam Trungpa discussed the mandala principle as orderly chaos in his early book by that name. He wrote, "It is orderly because it comes in a pattern. It is chaos because it is confusing to work with that pattern." Chogyam Trungpa developed the Maitri Space Awareness Practice for his students during the 1970s. It was intended as a healing practice both for persons recovering from extreme states and their therapists, to be done in therapeutic, contemplative communities. Let's contemplate the details of the graphic meaning of the diagram. Ed never spoke to us about this painting. Here I offer my experience of the diagram based on years of Maitri practice, study, and teaching alongside of Ed. In fact, each of us will resonate with the diagram in our own way. The symbols and iconography are based in Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. In Trungpa's tradition, a symbol does not refer to something else as a second thought, but rather a symbol embodies its own living meaning. For the practitioner of mandala, perception and understanding occur together as first thought. Everything happens now. The diagram has a handmade quality which conveys the raw and rugged experience of someone walking the path of meditation. The diagram appears in 2 spatial dimensions. The 3rd dimension of depth and the 4th dimension of time can be imagined. In this way, for example, seemingly flat circles can be visualized as spheres of radiant light in constant change. The many concentric circles of the diagram can be imagined as nested spheres of brilliant light. Let's progress from the outer fringe to the center of the mandala. First, we see the endpoints of 4 golden dorjes at the corners on a dark green background. A dorje is a symbol of indestructibility and is often translated as Vajra Thunderbolt. The blue, yellow, green, and red wisdom flames blaze out from the narrow band of primary colors ornamented with gold designs of small dorjes. The flames sweep to one side, suggesting that the colored circle is spinning clockwise. This circle surrounds the black ring, showing dried human skulls, which symbolize the uncompromising truth of death and impermanence. Taken together, dorjes, flames, rings, and skulls comprise the protection boundary of the mandala. This space of sacred truth is protected from deception and corruption. Within that boundary is the light green space, which is gentle and life-supporting. This accommodates 2 overlapping red triangles ornamented with 6 spinning spheres. The white edges of the triangles represent the essential purity of the 5 families and the whole situation. The triangles represent the source of ever-arising phenomena of experience and environment. Crossing the threshold of the pink inner circle, we enter the heart of the mandala, which again softly glows with gentleness. The 4 inner circles around the central red-white circle seem to swell against edges, making them elliptical. This expansion represents the intensification of experience by the practice, which rubs up against the sharp edges of discipline. These 5 circles represent the 5 Buddha families, each with their own symbol, element, and function. The blue Vajra family to the east shows a dorje and is associated with the water element that clarifies. The yellow Ratna family to the south shows jewels and is associated with the earth element that enriches. The red Padma family to the west shows a flame and is associated with the fire element that magnetizes. The green Karma family to the north shows a flaming sword and is associated with the wind element that accomplishes. The red-white Buddha family in the center shows a hook knife and is associated with the space element that accommodates. This diagram embodies the elemental meaning of the Maitri Space Awareness Practice. The mandala follows the basic paradigm of Windhorse environmental therapy, which is that we work from the outside in. This means that we first bring awareness to the outer decorum of body and environment, including one's personal household. Then we engage with the more inner speech level of relationship to open up channels of communication with friends. Only then do we work with the most secret personal level of mind and emotions. And so it also is with the Maitri Space Awareness Practice. First, we arrange the boundaries of our place as outer protection, and then take on one of the postures. We practice the instructions of being present with experience while soaking in colored light. By the power of our intention to be of service, we tune into our intrinsic ground of fearless clarity. Our awareness opens to the intensification of thought forms and emotional energies in our field of experience. We come to appreciate the accommodating space within which we can simply relax and accept what is made so obvious. The path of Maitri practice shows us the vivid mystery of orderly chaos. Do we freeze space? Do we dance with space? Who are we anyway? And what do all these patterns mean to us? Perhaps we catch a glimpse of ourselves and our world as being so good and beautiful. These are some of the gifts of the Maitri practice. It is my sincere wish for each of us that we realize and live from the loving kindness that is at the core of our being. In that way, may we come to know the wisdom of space. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome Jeff Fortuna to our class. Actually, Cassell thought about this, about bringing him to be able to share his wisdom with us, and I'm very excited to have Jeff here, and he's going to introduce himself and tell you more about his work and then talk about the Maitri practice. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to talk with all of you today. I can't see you. I'm imagining you'll be there, someone's future. So my name's Jeff Fortuna, and I'm a graduate of the Naropa psychology department in 1980. At that time, it was a master's program in Buddhist and Western psychology. And I was a student in that graduate program from 1976 to 1980, so I began a year after the program was founded. And I was, and I know our focus today is the Maitri Space Awareness Practice, so I'd like to just remind us all that that's going to be our touchstone, and we'll keep sort of circling back to that. I have been involved with the Windhorse Project since its inception in 1981. I was one of the co-founders, and you may or may not know, the Windhorse Project was initiated to create therapeutic teams that would support the recovery of a person in their own home, recovery from a serious mental illness. And we formed a initial treatment team, in 1981, not knowing that we would continue to do this work for the next 40 years. We thought this was just a one-time experiment. And that story's been told in Ed Podval's book, Recovering Sanity, about the founding of the project and how it went and what we began to learn. And we were primarily at that time also students and faculty of Naropa. So we were really applying our education and community, Naropa community, to this work with sometimes we used to call such people highly disturbed people, but maybe there's a more modern, the term we're using these days are people in extreme states. And when we founded the Windhorse Project in 1981, most of us already had experience with the Maitri Space Awareness Practice. We had been doing the Maitri Space Awareness Practice since the mid-70s at Naropa as part of the graduate program, which it still is to this day, integrated into the program. The question for us, and maybe the question for you, is, well, what's the relevance of that seemingly esoteric, specialized, rather odd practice, the Maitri Space Awareness Practice? How does that carry over to the healing work? That for us was the primary question. We were working in situations that you could say were relatively desperate, meaning these people, the people we were working with, were in desperate straits. We didn't have much time, you could call it maybe luxury of time, to discuss the subtleties and the nuances of the 5 Buddha families. It's an interesting sort of, it's like a quasi-metaphysical, philosophical view of the world, view of energy. We were really kind of up against the wall with trying to deal with very difficult people in really challenging situations. In the background was always kind of this feeling of life and death. And we were doing this in unsecured, unlocked household environments. So we just had each other to rely on, really. So the practice was, I was trying to think, okay, what's the best way to describe the influence of the practice on us, I suppose. It's many aspects, but we soon began to realize that the name of the practice, Maitri Space Awareness Practice, is not an accident. There's no way an accident. The experience of Maitri, a loving kindness to oneself, we soon began to realize is perhaps one of the primary antidotes to mental illness. And as we were being instructed, we were under the tutelage of Chogyam Trungpa at that time, and some of his students. Martin Casper was involved, of course, with the situation. Became the question of how to help a person in extreme states begin to discover Maitri, loving kindness to oneself. So we were learning about that in our Maitri practice and learning about that approach and how important that was to overcoming self-aggression, trying to change one's field of experience, manipulate experience, deceive oneself, all the 101 things everybody does to avoid being who one is, which you could say is a kind of aggression, to be something other than who one is. So we began to understand that the more of the depth of Maitri, and the Maitri Space Awareness Practice, one of the, you could call it magical elements of the practice, is that it engenders Maitri. How that happens, each practitioner would have to answer that question, how that happens. The other part of the name of the practice is space awareness, and that became for us in the Windhorse work, we translated that a little bit. We began to refer to something called environmental awareness. So for us, environmental awareness was happening. The development of environmental awareness was key to setting up uplifting environments, what we called environments of sanity, in which to host a person in an extreme state who was lost in extremes. So we were trying to do everything we could to learn more about creating environments of sanity that were uplifting, nurturing, clarifying, accommodating, and loving. So we were doing this in a household. Each person was living in their own household. Our relationships were expressing, you could call that the sanity of relationship or the sanity of social space. And the relaxation and openness that mind can bring to an environment and infuse the environment with one's awareness and openness. So yeah, I'm saying quite a lot here. Maybe I should pause for a second. How does this come across?
Yeah, it's wonderful. I definitely would have some questions, but perhaps you'll get to them. In terms of the integration, and you're talking about how you worked with people's environment, their home situation. Yes. That would be an interesting thing for you to go into. For example, for any of us not in an extreme state, although we all experience some extreme states here and there.
Yeah.
How would we structure our environment to actually be uplifting, sane, loving?
Yes.
That's my question.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. That's good. Yeah. So this is reminding me of a story along this line. So in 1987, I believe it was, 1985, perhaps, I was involved with the design and construction of the Maitri rooms that are now at Naropa, right? So around 1985, 1986, my partner and I, Connor Loomis, we were helping to create that facility. And so we had completed it, and we had a few things we hadn't quite figured out yet, like, for example, the ventilation system. Couldn't quite figure out what kind of ventilation system and how it would be installed in the rooms, because our impression was that these rooms were seamless, wall, ceiling, floor, color, like a seamless. So if you introduce some kind of mechanical element in the visuals, is that an issue? How are we going to do that? So we invited Chogyam Trungpa to come to tour the new facility, and we wanted to ask him some design questions. He was the founder of the practice, obviously. He was the main designer. We thought, well, let's ask the expert, the origin of the practice. So Chogyam Trungpa came down, and this was, I think it was a year and a half before he died. I mean, he was pretty ill at that point, wasn't talking much, but he came down to Naropa one afternoon, impeccably dressed, and he came into the room. So we started taking a tour, and I was leading him through this tour, and I said, "Sir, we need to put some ventilation in this room." Can't remember which room we were in. Maybe it was let's just say the Rotner room, for example, where you're laying on your back and your arms and legs are wide open and you're looking up at the ceiling, more or less. And he said, put it right up there. And he pointed at a specific spot in the ceiling to put a vent that would have a little motor that would make a sound. So it was a ventilation, moving air kind of element. And I said, but sir, that's going to interrupt the field of vision, and don't you think we ought to put it, more out of sight? And he said, no. He said, it needs to be right there. And he explained that we needed that kind of significant reminder of the principle of ventilation, that we were going to be in these rooms encased in our own projections for the most part, and we needed to be reminded of the space of the possibility of ventilation, of freedom of movement, of openness beyond the claustrophobia of the realms we were going to spend a lot of time in. And that was kind of remarkable. So I was astonished, first of all, that he thought we were that out of it, that we needed a concrete reminder, but also the beauty of that, the practicality of that. So we always, though I told this story, I told this to some people that we were, that I was working with in Windhorse, and this became always a touchstone for us. So in our households with people, as you can well imagine, we're looking at creating environments that have some kind of feeling of ventilation. So perhaps their windows can be opened. Perhaps we're going to rent a household that has south-facing windows so we can get good light. So we began to pay attention to the details of each household environment and each room that we were going to have this person, like, where are they going to sleep? Is there a movement? Is there a ventilation in the room? And it became also an element that we used in or not used, but sort of remembered in our relationships and the way we work with our awareness. Sense of humor is a ventilating kind of element, right? So we made sure to, what do you call it? Try to have a light heart or light touch when working with the heaviest of situations. There's always room for a little lightness. And so this is just a small example of the principle of ventilation and the principle of opening up a claustrophobic, compressed, dark state of mind, in which you could call entrapment in a realm. So that's his story. That happened.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
would you be able to talk about perhaps how does one person integrate after experiencing the energy separately, and of course working at finding resonance of them within oneself?
yes.
And so now you have this view, I would imagine, after doing the rooms for the first time, that you see that you have a little of this and a little of that, some Padma and some Vajra. And is there a way to put it together, or is it even necessary to do that? How do you do that with oneself? And then how do you do that externally?
Right. Let's see. Maybe I could just relate one thing that I did here, which is connected with this, and then also how we've gone about this. So there was a teacher at one time, the primary student of Dharma Air of Chogyam Trungpa was Ursel Tenzin. And he was, during this period of the 80s when we were starting Windhorse and studying at Naropa and still working with Chogyam Trungpa, Ursel Tenzin, he had also been involved with the early founding of the Maitri communities. He was part of that world. And he told us one time that it's important to, he said, you have to learn more about what he called mandala, or maybe another term, maybe a translation of that I prefer, or that in English anyway, I prefer it, but it is situational patterning. Situations pattern themselves in a dynamic fashion, and there's a completeness and a wholeness to those situations. He said the 5 Buddha family mandala or total pattern. You might have an experience of one coming into the foreground or another. They move into the foreground and then dissolve and then move back into the background, but they're all present all the time. You cannot separate one of the families from the other four in reality. You can separate them conceptually. You can talk about one. I mean, that's always the problem with talking, right? You can just talk about one. He said, but in the actual awareness practice of the 5 Buddha family mandala, one may be in the foreground and your attention may be on that as a highlight. The other 4, the mandala is always present. So that's an important, especially if you're caught up in some intense emotion, like anger, for example, which might be associated with the Vajra family, and you're thinking, oh, I'm in the Vajra, or I'm in the hell realm, which also is anger, right? The other energies are present. There's nurturing, there's spaciousness, all that. And so part of the problem with an intense emotion is that you become so hyper-focused on it that you lose track of the larger context, the mandala. So it's a kind of mandala awareness practice. It's like constantly expanding outside of the pinpoint of one's focus, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So becoming aware of the energies. Yeah, I think one of the other, of course, we've had this instruction over and over, which is to be careful of hyper-conceptualizing the 5 Buddha families, where they become a typology of ideas in which you can pigeonhole people, you can diagnose people. It becomes a fancy way of putting people in categories. None of us really want to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's a kind of conceptual map that can become a prison. So, I mean, in our experience, the Windhorse people, what we were doing with the Maitri practice was, in a sense, using it as a medium or as a method to contact direct experience. That is very hard to do, I've found. I mean, I've been in pursuit of direct experience for most of my life. Mm. What do I mean by direct? It's like unmediated by that conceptual pattern. Mm. Direct experience. And the Maitri practice, if you're doing the practice, you find that your conceptual machinery starts to kind of buck and gets jarred. And sometimes, and you begin to have other experiences you didn't bargain for in the Maitri practice. It's not all, peaches and cream or whatever the expression would be. Like you might have experiences of suddenly you just fell off the edge of something. And then you're just somewhere else and you're a little confused. But then you bring your attention back to your body. Maybe you start over. Like luckily you have this body that's in a posture. So, and it has a little bit of pain or tension to it because the postures have a little bit of that element to them. So it helps you to come back to the sheer presence of being in that room, in that color, in that posture. So you're fully present. And then maybe you fall off another edge. So this kind of thing. So direct experience of energy is an elusive. It's funny because we're swimming in it all the time. So how elusive can it be? But strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's one of the most compelling, perhaps, teachings in Buddhism, in relationship to no self and direct experience, What is it that's experiencing?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. They do have readings on mandala principle from Orderly Chaos. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally love that book. To me, it's a direct transmission. It's amazing. Yeah.
One of the ways that we've tried to approach direct experience, I suppose you could say, in our work is so we were being instructed by Chogyam Trungpa, and a lot of his friends were unbalanced. A lot of his students were us, we were unbalanced. So he was drawn to unbalanced people, bless his heart. And so he was always saying, talking about being grounded, emphasizing the element of earth. He said at one point it's something like, it's better to be on the earth eating shit than dancing in the sky, this kind of thing. So it's better to be on the earth. So we took that very literally, and we began to place some of our attention on the elements associated with each of the families: earth, water, fire, air, and space. And we began to bring a kind of elemental awareness, because that, in a way, through the sense perceptions, you could say the direct experience, much of it is mediated by the sense perception. So being able to touch the earth, being able to feel the heat, the beauty of water around one, drinking water. So this kind of environmental awareness for us became the mandala, the earth mandala. And that was so grounding and so real in our work with highly disturbed people who were functioning in quite a disarray. Their senses were in disarray often, their ability to function was in disarray. So sensory awareness, sensory experience was very grounding and sane somehow for all of us. So in some ways we began to, or maybe myself, I became very interested in the functioning of the element as a mandala, the elemental mandala. Sometimes the 5 Buddha family mandala could seem overly abstract to me. I couldn't quite manage it somehow, or became abstract. I don't know how else to put it. Or too much of a grand idea. So, but the elements, that I was like, okay, right at hand, here we are. We're in the elements, we're constructed of the elements. The element of space was translated into being with people. Being with people, fully present with another person, became a kind of interpersonal contemplative discipline. Being fully present with another person without doing to them, manipulating them, having an agenda. I mean, there's probably room for that, but we're talking about, so we began to bring the element of space to our therapy work, psychotherapy work, of sharing space with a person, period.
Wow.
And that yeah.
That's beautiful, because that really is the basis for therapy, especially in the MA Buddha Studies, program, but also in meditation instruction in general.
Oh yeah.
And in sharing a space with another person in all kinds of settings. So that's awesome. I love the way that you translated that.
Thank you.
Can you talk about the other elements too, then?
Sure. Do we dare? Let's see. Well,
the 4 karmas in relationship to the 4
do.
elements. Yeah.
I was thinking more about climate change, actually, and that
Oh,
the elements are coming for us. Maybe that's why I was
It's
laughing uncomfortably. I have an uncomfortable feeling the elements are coming for us. Like, I live in Louisville, and we were nearly consumed in the urban fire a few months ago.
yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, wow. So we've got the dryness, we've got the absence of water, dry fuel, heat, fire. And so the elements. So one way that we were talking about this in our Windhorse work, which was a wonderful thing to do with other trusted colleagues. If you, I'm speaking to the MDiv students, if you have a way to work with a team in the future, do it. Take it. It's so great to have colleagues you can talk things over with and explore and be creative with. So, which we had. And I might say that the original inspiration for the Maitri Space Awareness Practice was always in community. It was not to be done as a yogic practice on retreat, particularly. You didn't hear about people doing Maitri retreats. You heard about, well, group retreats, community retreats, always in community. So in Windhorse, we've taken on responsibility in the sense to keep the spirit of the Maitri community alive in our teams and in our clinical work. And so that's a whole other kind of dimension to the Maitri practice that you don't hear much about, but I mean, you have it in your class, of course, a facsimile of that, and you're doing the practice together, which is a facsimile of that. So anyway, in our teams, in our community, we were talking about the elements and the responsiveness. So if you're with a person and a person is manifesting, say, an intensified one of the elements, they're hot with anger, let's say hot with anger, we would allow ourselves or be sensitive to a response that was somehow complementary. So if somebody were, well, let's talk about the element of wind. That's usually more, Tibetan medicine makes a kind of a big deal about wind disorders. So the wind element, if somebody's in a windy place, their mind is spinning out, they're agitated, anxious, distracted, their hands and feet are cold, and they're ready to run. Let's just say that's a wind intensification. The attendant, the therapist, may respond with an earthy feeling, right? An earth, and it just may be before thought. You didn't plan this. It's just your response, having worked with yourself, having generated self-awareness and the ability to respond to another person. So we began to look at complementarity among elements in relationship. So earth. So maybe I start to feel how my body, like I suddenly feel like I weigh 500 pounds. And I'm aware of being so almost slowed down. Like my mind starts, maybe my limbs begin to feel a little bit like an elephant. Like this heavy, ponderous, slow, and the person might look at you and say, what's wrong with you? Don't you see the danger we're in, and this kind of thing, or you're so slow, you're dragging me down, whatever it might be. So we began to look at elemental responding. I don't know how else to put it, but that became a kind of something we were looking into. Cassell, do you have something on your mind there?
Well, I was just thinking of the earth. Would it be that you would somehow want to moisten it, or that?
Oh, yeah.
Wind might just make it more solid.
That's great. Yeah, this is probably one of those examples. Thank you, Cassell, where all the elements, it's an elemental mandala, right? So it's all present. So we've got two highlights, the wind and the earth. And then the two people might look at it, one of them might say, geez, I'm really thirsty right now. Like become aware of a somatic imbalance.
Yeah.
Like we're, especially out here where we live, it's like getting enough water. So we might share some water together. Or I might say to the windy person, let me offer you a glass of water. Right. So now we've got the water and some generosity together. And so you begin to get tuned into the body, actual body, which is somewhat connected with direct experience. The body's going to let you know. And then usually in wind disorders, there's a separation from the body, and it's this sky problem.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. We did talk about the elements to some extent, but I do think that that's another area that it first feels very abstract, you know, to see the
Yes.
elements functioning in your
Yeah.
own body. Everybody knows about water, of course, because we're 80%, you know, water, but not many people see the connection with earth, you know, in the body, or fire in the body, and so on. You
That's
know.
great. You're Giovanni. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the spaces in the body. The space. There's space in the body.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I would like to ask Jeff if he could please expand a bit more on how the practice of Maitri Space Awareness and loving kindness to oneself, how that connects with compassion in the many, many aspects of it. If you could please talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. The Maitri Space Awareness Practice is rigorous, as you know. Holding a posture. I assume you're doing maybe 40-minute or so sessions, maybe less, but that's maybe a standard. So a good period of time, holding a posture, keeping the eyes open, soaking in the color. It's unusual, and it's something that we're not at all really familiar with, actually, doing that kind of thing. The Maitri practice, space awareness practice, seems to have as we talked about it, a kind of a power to jar us out of our familiar way of being, and can reveal us to ourselves. It's a revelatory practice. It puts the mind, especially the mind that imagines and projects, that part of the mind, puts some light on that part of the mind, and we're, before we know it, drifting in some daydream, some fantasy, some thought form. We may feel that there's other people in that room with us. Who knows? And we see how our mind is sort of opening itself out. It's like unwrapping itself and opening it. And like it or not, we are looking at our own mind, so to speak. And we will learn things about ourselves that may be embarrassing, things we'd rather not know, things that we'd rather not remember, things that we'd rather not feel, and is being revealed. And so many practitioners have attested to the fact that in the end, the only sane response to that is kindness, is accommodating one's own. You begin to, I mean, sometimes I'll be doing that practice and I just feel sorry for myself. It's like, oh, you poor man. This is what you put yourself through. This is what you wish you weren't, but you are. So you get this kind of kindness and feeling of, it's a certain feeling of accepting who you are and how you are, which is really quite beautiful. First, it's beautiful that you're overcoming your own self-deception about what a fantastic person you thought you were. So you're overcoming that. That's also very beautiful. But the fact that you could embrace yourself in a warm way and accept yourself because you are alone in that room with yourself. There's nobody else is going to make it all right. There's no mommy or daddy that's going to come in and kiss you on the forehead and tell you to sleep well. You're on your own. And so that's how you're going to rise to the occasion. So you begin to learn directly about befriending oneself, so to speak. That kind of directness gives you a platform, gives one a platform to then do that with another person. You begin to befriend another person in their totality. They're irritating, they go on too much, they twitch, they can't button their shirt correctly, you name it. Irritations are everywhere. And you're just finding a way to befriend the other person in their totality. And the other person will feel that. they just feel it. And it's a strange kind of palpable elemental energy of befriending someone. It moves mountains in a way. Can. So I don't know about compassion so much. I mean, it's the Dalai Lama, he could probably talk about compassion. He probably does. He should. He's an expert. But I mean, if we could go as far as talking about learning the true meaning of friend, I mean, that would be awesome. And the honesty that goes with that, I mean, I think that's always going to be part of the friendship. And this is something that we were always working on in our Windhorse work. We still do, is the friend who is brave enough to be truthful and risk jeopardizing the friendship. If you can't be truthful, if you can't come forward with being truthful because you're afraid of losing the friendship, you've already lost it. You've already lost it. We're talking about, that's another kind of friendship. That's probably more like a collusion to get along. So true friend, I mean, we were always looking at this in our Windhorse work. We have this term we use, therapist friend, healer friend. So, and the Maitri practice, you know, so much can begin there in helping a person learn directly about this kind of friend, So that's kind of what comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking chaplain friend as you were saying that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Or companion. That's a little different companion. It's not so, it's more a side-by-side thing rather than a direct, relationship. But
right.
Yeah.
So how do you know when something is the truth, like a true friend? How do you know that?
Yeah. I mean, personally, how else can I talk personally? But if you practice meditation long enough, mindfulness awareness long enough, or Maitri practice long enough, you begin to tune into one's own inherent intrinsic ability to know what's true. It becomes a feeling. You can have a feeling about whether something lands well or not. Of course, the timing of offering truth to somebody, of course, big deal. You have to understand timing, but I think there's two things. So you have to have develop your own sense, truth sense. At the same time, you have to watch what's going on with the other person. So that's a kind of environmental awareness. You're watching the interchange. How is that person responding to you? Are they grimacing? Are they nodding in agreement? What are they doing? And then you can also ask people, how's this land for you? Because what's true for me may not be particularly true for somebody else. I mean, there's some so-called relative truth, right? I don't think climate change is a relative truth. I think it's probably more elemental than that. Maybe there's elemental truth. You can't mess with the elements. You just can't. But however, people, human realm, sure, we can. It's a hall of mirrors. So I think we're talking about truthful communication,
right?
As a discipline, really, as a that you care about it. You care about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Wow, that's great. I see that it's time for us to end this conversation, and I just want to thank you again, Jeff. I wish we could have you for 2 more hours at least.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for hosting. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.